recording that's for YouTube for later on. Great, welcome. Hi, it's Tom. I'm making the Recall Singularity, which is a factory game set in space. You can learn more about that by having a look at my Twitter page. That's the best way to find out. I'm not really a super duper fancy streamer yet. I'm just figuring this out, so bear with me. Here's my space game. Come along to, in fact, now that I think about it, I probably should pop that on here. So I'll put that there. And the font size is probably still a bit small, so let's just pump that up a bit because I like small fonts, but they don't stream very well. So font size, we'll go for 16. Oh, no, not 126, 16. Okay. So yeah, I haven't streamed for a little while because I stayed up really late doing a variety of things for ExileCon, and as a result I got really tired, and so I can't do it easy. Last night I was we were doing some networking code in the past. I got that all up and running now. I kind of struggled through it, so I kind of felt a bit embarrassed to stream that anyway. Sometimes you just don't really plan things, you just muck around, and it just felt bad. This is going to be even more mucking around tonight, I expect. I need to actually even figure out what the plan is so we can do that together. And yeah, okay. Let's have a look at what we've got. So what can I run? I don't think I'm running the right. No, this is Laminar actually. So that's a library we use for networking. So this is a kind of a reference. I would only have this window open to understand things. So open a new window with my code in it and move Laminar, which is the networking library, out of the way. Let's see. Here we go. So the Recall Singularity is a multiplayer game set in space with factories. I've got very big ideas, and I'm expecting to just take it one step at a time, and we'll just get there eventually. So right now I'm focusing on making it multiplayer. I'm thinking that the easiest way to, pardon me for any burps or bad smells, the easiest way to make this work action-wise is to have people put their inputs in. We're going to send them over the network every frame, essentially. Might even end up polling the network every frame. So the way that we currently got this working is, I should be able to give you a demo now, run. So I've got multiple projects here. So this is the client running. It's pretty chatty right now. So after every frame, it says that it's slept and for how long it slept for. So it's programmed to basically sleep for 50 milliseconds, but when it wakes up, it's often later than 50 milliseconds. So it sleeps for a bit less. It calculates how long it needs to sleep to stay in sync with the time step. It's a neat bit of code. It's very chatty. We're going to get rid of that chattiness soon, so it won't be saying sleep in a moment. If I run the game, it brings up another console, and you'll see the response. It's now talking to the server. So if I just pause this, we have a look here, we can see that the server received a connect message. Here's a message, this long auth string. We're going to put data in that later on. A version number, a buffer. Now, the thing which is important for writing UDP is that the first message from the client can actually come from can actually point back to literally anybody. So I could send a message saying that I was you, and I could tell the server to send you a message back. And if the server sends you more data than I sent the server, then I can launch something called an amplification attack on you, which is where I send a small amount of data to the server and it then attacks you with it. So that's why we need a very big connect packet. The connect packet has something in it called a salt, and then the server processes this and sends back a message called a challenge, which contains a challenge response. Right now I'm too lazy to use random numbers. I wanted something nice and simple. We'll have to change that later, but probably not tonight. So the server sends back a challenge salt, and then the client needs to know that challenge salt to be able to continue talking. At the moment, this is coming back every message. If you watched my previous stream, you would have seen me code some of this in from the past. Well, it's all up and running now. And because it's all up and running, we've got a client here and it's in sync. So as soon as I fixed all the bugs, it just started working. So all the network stack that I had before was back in. Messages. So when I move, at the moment, if I move the little dude around, this is completely client side. So easiest way to demonstrate that is to open a second game. So now we've got 2 of these running. This is actually the first time I've tried running 2 clients against the new network implementation. So here's where we find all the bugs. Hey Adwani, yeah, nothing really going on yet. I'm just explaining what's going on. So this is a demo of the new network code. Welcome. That ship not having a flaw is just a rendering glitch. Don't worry too much about that. This is just one of the synchronization problems we're going to fix. Oh, something interesting going on. I think the client's fallen behind because it's not doing things. Oh, I know what's wrong. See, I selected some text here. I need to stop selecting text and let the server run. When the server has got text selected, it basically pauses, and when the server's paused, the world's paused. So that was bad. Okay. Anyway, it's probably all catching up right about now. Let's try building that floor one more time. We might need to restart this demo. Yeah. Everything's a little bit, just a bit unreliable at the moment. Oh, that's working. There we go. So everything's caught up and figured out. The ball building doesn't look correct. Interesting. Yeah, these are things we'll be fixing. So what's going on is there if we look over here, we should find that these are in sync. They're not in sync. And there's also interesting problems. That's great. Yay. I really hope that the switch to Lamina works out to be worth the trouble, because if you watch my first stream, you'll see that was working pretty much flawlessly, and I haven't changed anything but the network stack yet. Okay, so those sleeps are because at the moment the server is running 20 frames a second, and between the frames it's writing out sleep. Now these constant writing sleep and all this writing here is debug information, but that's going to be slowing down everything. So when I get rid of all the writing, it's going to actually work a lot better. Outputting to the console is one of the most expensive things you can do, unfortunately. It's better to write to a file. So let's start by just making these clients a bit quieter. So we've got a bunch of diagnostic output we can remove. Just thinking whether if I want to do that with the diff or if I want to do it by hand. I think I'll just do it by hand, it's probably easier. So we'll start by finding the sleep. Yes, so the sleeps are the result of the main loop. Both server and client are running 2 threads for the networking. They're running one thread to read and write the packets, and they're running one thread that's running a 15 millisecond loop. In fact, I'm not even using these headphones. I'll just take those off. They're not doing anything for me. I only had them on earlier for testing. Okay, so the I like what you said. We'd constructed. That's funny. Yes, the processes require sleep. So, if you've got a multi-threaded system, there's something called sleep that puts the thread, tells the thread to stop for a certain number of milliseconds. Oh, that probably came out awfully on the microphone. Sorry. Let's see. So in order to make sure that we do the processing every 50 milliseconds, I have a system which will sleep long enough that the next tick will be 50 milliseconds after the previous one should have been, and then that will keep the ticks nice and consistent across different clients, so that we don't have the server ticking unreasonable frequencies. And that process is handled. Where are we? SG core, SG net, connection. Was in connection, I think. Nope, that's the raw connection libraries lib. We had run server and run client. Yes, it was this tick forever. So tick forever is the one that's writing sleep, or it is making sure that they run at a certain frequency. So for each loop, we figure out how long they need to sleep. Here's the sleeping. Here's where we write the word sleep. So we're going to get rid of that, and so it won't say sleep anymore. The other problem was that it was writing all the messages. So when we're looking at writing all the messages, we go to server, and here in server. So this is structure like this is what's causing the messages to be written. So we don't want any of this output code. We're happy to write out when there's errors. They'll be useful. That's an error. This is might as well say first connection attempt, because that won't happen very often. Connect retry. Yep, that's unusual. Challenge response doesn't match. Yep. Yep, that's worth leaving in. Yep. Okay, so those are all errors. We won't see them very often, so it's okay to leave those in. My wife hates my squeaky chair. Hopefully you guys don't feel too bad about it. Error decoding. Server sent incorrect salt. Incorrect challenge. Message received. Yeah, so this one is also diagnostic output. Why did I put that in a process packet? Oh, it's like it's ignoring it. Client. Oh, I see. If we receive a message that's not expected, not the right type, at the wrong time, when we're not connected, then we ignore it. So it's a message received outside of a connection. So we'll say something about that. Those ones could probably stay. So I'm just getting rid of diagnostic input. Print packet. I don't think I called this one. Oh yes, there's one. So that's extra output we don't want. Okay, let's try that and see how noisy it is now. So that's recompiling. I'll queue up. Oops, that's the wrong one. I tried to run the server again. That's not going to work. Let's run the client. Oh, it didn't compile. I must have malformed something. Process message. That's really odd. I probably put a typo into it. Let's see if I can find this. I can't find it. It's just... Yeah, it's a massage. I wouldn't want to process a massage. I more likely want to process a message. Why do I want to process a massage? How the hell did that get there? I mean, maybe it's a hint or something. Hey, welcome DHX. Okay, so now the server's a lot less chatty. That's good. That won't stop me from being chatty. Let's run the game. Here we go. Okay, so that ran okay. This is still really chatty. So I need to get rid of this text that says connected. Let's say something. And you can probably guess that was like a placeholder, because I wrote the code that wrote that out right at the start before I had to actually send anything useful. So I'm going to get rid of that line. I'm glad that it actually does something useful now. Here we are. So we'll quit the client and we'll run it again. Oh, that's more like it. So you can see here, you know, it's loading. It's got all the different scenes, all the meshes, got all the materials, and we're good to go. And it's saying not too much. Oh, I see. We lost our connection when I selected the box and things timed out. So it sent it basically queued up a lot of messages saying connect, and it sent them all at once. That's really interesting. We might have to do something about that, but I mean, you know, it's an unrealistic situation. It's not like we're going to pause. What we do when the thing lags out, it's going to be interesting. We'll do that later. Those are problems we have to solve just, well, sometime. So add floor here, but it didn't send us back a message saying it had been added, which is interesting. Floor build. No? Okay. So that action's not working. So the server's still telling me that the client's trying to connect and it's getting disconnected. So that's why the floor's not being built. Okay, so why is the client disconnecting? The client's sending a connect and it's sending a challenge response. It's getting a challenge response. Sending back a challenge accept. I've just stuffed it up somehow. I mean, maybe I found another edge case in my networking. This is part of the handshake. Whoops, it's the wrong code repository. Nope, wrong one as well. Hold on a second. You didn't see any of that. Let's have a look. Client server. Just wondering if maybe somehow I deleted some code that wasn't just debug output. I don't understand. Oh yeah, I've just found another edge case, I guess. Those shapes on the terminal by Rust. I'm sorry, Adwani, I don't understand your question. Oh, these ones? Oh, that's just a simple piece of code. Those shapes are mostly those are visual, like ASCII art versions of the ship layouts, and they come from production floor, which is a class that manages the ship layout. There's this function here, render to string. I think I got one for the floor as well. Let's see. This one is just rendering the conveyors, like left, right, up, down for the different conveyors. And somewhere we've also got another one for the floor wall string. So we call this production floor wall character to find one of the walls, and here's all the different kinds of walls you can have. And so that's where basically we're just drawing the grid of the ship from the top left down to the bottom. For each part of the wall, we write out the relevant character. So we've got a case statement on the outside for which kind of wall we've got, and then each kind of wall has its own symbol. And then in addition, for the floor building, floor tiling, I think this is the class where it is. Well, this one understands how to make the floor itself. Wall type. It's not wall type. No. Simulation. Core net server simulation. And inside of here we have our actions. We have adjust floor. Adjust floor understands how to add and remove walls. And it also understands how to change their directions. And for testing it, naturally I have unit tests. And the unit tests call assert floor patterns. They do a couple of operations and then they check that the room renders like this, or like this, or like that. So the rendering that you see, this rendering, I did it for unit tests. That's why it exists that way. So this function here just runs these actions in sequence. So these actions are what the client sends to the server, an action for adjusting the floor. And assert floor pattern just goes through each of the actions and knows how to call them on the world, and then it gets the string for the world, and it checks that the strings match. So that's how that works. And if it doesn't work, if the floors don't match, so I should be able to run test simulation. So I've got this is compiling. It'll probably take a while. I haven't actually run these tests for a little while. I should probably write some more unit tests for the handshaking protocol. If I write some tests for the handshaking protocol, we'll probably find some of these bugs faster. How would I write those? I need to have either form a proper UDP connection, or I need to write a mock of some kind to pass it through. So that would be a bit of a nuisance. So what is failing? Okay, so we've got a problem with one of my unit tests because I changed the numbering. When I was doing the networking connection stuff off camera, so we've got a diff here, and I look at this diff and I can see immediately that this first byte is different than it was before, and this first byte represents the type of action that's being sent. So if I was to go into the network code, it's here, and I scroll down, no, It's not actions, it's network events. Let's have a look. Net. I can put in a lib. No. Where did I put it? I'll probably put it in this network module here. Wow, this is embarrassingly long to find what I'm looking for. Wow, that was really bad. Let's have a look. So we're looking for challenge accept, challenge message, that sort of thing. There, they're in server messages. Great. Okay, so the test is failing because I just uncommented all of these. So I've just moved everything by 3. So these 2, which are down below, have just had their action IDs increased by 3 places by adding ones above them. So this test is now failing to say the binary representation has changed. So I've got 2 options. I could either move those in the enumerator down, or I could just change the test. I'm going to change the test. And this is one thing you got to bear in mind with testing, is that you got to be careful not to do too many tests that will break all the time. 7. This kind of test is called golden data. So it's when you have some test and it creates an answer, and the answer is actually just some data you captured earlier. And if the data changes, it's probably a bug. Okay. So the reason why I mentioned that is because I wanted to talk about the floor tiling. So if I go into adjust floor and I go into one of these routines and I take out this part here where it's adding a module, for instance, and then I run the tests, and all sorts of things are going to blow up in our face. So you see lots of tests have failed. So for instance, this test, it expected to see the map on the right hand side, which has walls in it, but instead it saw the map on the left hand side, which has no walls in it. And it's like, yeah, the walls didn't work. No. And of course earlier I had problems where the corners were flat and so on rather than being corners. So that's where there's kind of test win for us. And it was a lot easier to write that test than to spin up the entire UI and then visually confirm that the walls were there. So that's our unit test. I've got a whole bunch of those now. Okay, so I've got 2 things to think about. I've discovered a new bug, which is that there's a particular way the handshakes can fail to work. And in fact, we're probably still going on. So I've got, this is running here, and it's, what's it doing? It sends a challenge response, and then the client doesn't see, the server doesn't see, the server accepts it, and then the client must receive it and not do anything with it, or it must go back to the wrong place. I wonder how that's going on. Because I just removed all the diagnostic output, it's a bit harder to see what's actually going on there. Yeah, might have to put it all back again. Okay, where's my... I'm just trying to find my little output window that contains the server, because somewhere around here I've got a server window. That's the game. I've lost it. Alt tab, no, Control tab. That's the one. And I want to see the run window, which is, oh yes, it's in another tab here. That's what's going on. Okay. So somewhere in the server it was talking to the client. What did it do? It sent a challenge accept to the client. And then the client disconnected. So when the client received a challenge accept, it wasn't handling that. So let's have a look at the client and just see if I can figure out why. Process packet. Connect challenge. Okay, so what happens in send outgoing? Send outgoing. Sets our state to connect. Then it sends a reliable, this. Okay, so after sending this message to the server, which we saw, we know we must be in the connect mode. We haven't changed. So we come up here. We should receive a challenge. We set our state here to challenge. We go back down here. We should send a challenge response. We saw the server sent that, got that, and sent back a accept. So we're in challenge mode. We get an accept. We should either see connected okay, and then maybe it goes to connected. Let's just say it did. And we should handle the rest of the messages. We drop down here. Yeah, I'm lost as to how that's happening. That's really weird. I wonder if it's going to happen again. Let's just run this again and see if we can get it to recreate the same bug. Run. Hope you guys aren't bored by too much debugging. It ran the tests again, so I need to just tell it to run the core again. Run. We want to run the server. One annoying thing about running a client-server application and testing in this particular way, as opposed to unit tests, is because there are timing issues. If I stop the server in a debugger, where different things could happen than they would happen if it was running free without being stopped. So that means that debugging is not usually the best option. It could tell us something, but it couldn't help us as much as logging will help us, or logic might help us. Okay, so here I am again with my client. Going to build some more floor. Okay, so building this caused the same problem. So it caused the client to drop out. Now, one thing which is interesting here is that whenever we send messages, we need to send them. Send them with a prefix that contains the challenge message, which is what it's doing with the send all routine. It's always sending a challenge. The challenge is configured properly. I'm wondering what it is. What is it about sending that event that I'm sending that's causing it to drop out? Yeah, ignoring message doesn't start with valid challenge response. That's a smoking gun. Wonder what causes it to disconnect there. It's starting to look like this network protocol requires more. There's something called a heartbeat, which I can turn on. I think part of our problem is actually that this is not sending the so-called heartbeat all the time, because it's not sending the heartbeat when the client doesn't do anything for long enough. It drops out. The heartbeat's only a short-term problem, because soon we're going to be sending events all the time for input. But in the absence of those events, we're going to require those events are going to require a heartbeat. So let's learn about that. Laminar heartbeat rust. Okay, I found the book. But this is still not ready. Heartbeat. Does it tell me how to set up a heartbeat? The option is enabled by default. Okay. So in that case, it should already be sending a heartbeat. Packet type heartbeat. Huh. I don't think I mentioned a heartbeat anywhere. Okay, there's a lot of mentions of heartbeat, but I think they're all in libraries. Heartbeat must be part of the library. Packet structure. Yeah, I don't think I'm seeing a heartbeat. Okay. All very perplexing. So Wireshark should be able to watch this. Problem with Wireshark, of course, I've got a lot of stuff going on my computer, so Wireshark's always going to see a ton of stuff. Let's have a look at this. So Wireshark, I might be able to see something on the loopback, but I'm probably going to see a lot of stuff on the loopback. I don't know what those ports are for. But what we do know is that we want UDP, and we want the dest, port. And we're interested in, I'm not an expert at filters, so, I'm not an expert at Wireshark filters, so let's have a look through here for where the server is set up by default, which should be in the problem with streaming is I always feel a bit like a fool because I'm kind of like in front of everybody. At least when I'm doing this by myself with no one watching, I can be an idiot and it doesn't matter. Performance anxiety. Okay. Client connection lib net server. I think server's on which holds this information. No. I think I put a big server equals constant. Need to look for a case. Thank you, Mr. Reconstructor. I appreciate that. 12351. I know. I judge myself very harshly a lot. Anyway. Equals 12351. And I don't think that's the correct way of forming it. So let's just use the expression tool. We're looking for UDP. We're looking for port. Where's port? Source or destination port is in equals to, put a value in here. We want 12351. Get rid of this extra text. So yes, double equal. Oh, that was easy. That's pretty much what I would assume. Yes. Weird shark. So source and destination naturally myself. There's a lot of communication going on here. More than I was expecting to see. So if I quit the game, this one, quit, good. So I can see that the Wireshark's gone silent, there's nothing going on. So we'll stop and start and continue without saving. So it's blank, we'll run the game. We've got some messages getting recorded. We're going to build a floor, and then I'm going to quit the game. Wow, it thinks it's the Dropbox Land Sync Discovery Protocol. And anyway, I'm going to stop. So I'm not sure where in this stream of events things got unraveled. What we can do is should be able to look at the length. These ones that are really long will probably connect packets. I wonder if we can go into connection mode. Let's see. Conversation filter. UDP conversation. No, that didn't work. I don't want a conversation filter. So I'm going to get rid of that part. I'm going to go back to what we used to have. I wonder if it's in this drop-down list here. So it's UDP port equals 12351. Yep. And we should have the data is here. 540900. I bet that 5409 is coming from Laminar. It might be that actually there's quite a lot of overhead here, that actually only the very last part here is me. Laminar. Why when it says, oh, I see it's not showing me all the data, that's why. Okay. When do I see all the data? This is not as useful as I was hoping it was going to be. And actually, if you look at this, you'll see that the server is sending a lot more messages than the client. Like most of the time, the client's completely silent. So here's the client sending a bunch. That's the server. That's the client sending a message to the server. The server sends a message to the client, and then back from the client to the server, and then the server sends the client a broadcast really, really, really fast and frequently, all the way down through here, and more and more and more and more. I don't see any messages from the client to the server for a long time. This might be some of the issues that I had initially when I was using Laminar, that I got frustrated that it was blocking the communication, waiting for a communication to go back the other way anyway. That there was some sort of issue where it was waiting to send stuff until it got a response of some kind. That originally put me off the idea because it wasn't acting the way I expected it to. So I've been tossing up the idea of undoing all the refactoring we did. Remember how we changed from Cobalt to Laminar? And that took, well, basically 3 nights, which is like a week. And now I'm wondering if maybe that was the right choice or not. And at this point, I think we can just say, look, we can always go back. It's Git. All these commits. This one, this one, this one, that one, this one, that one. We can leave them on a branch. This extra scene lights on top, that one we want to keep. This input layout we want to keep. Okay, so official, unofficial, we're switching back to Cobalt. Shouldn't take very long. We'll just quit all the programs. It's very painful to do this. Feels like a waste of time. Let's just call it an experiment. Okay, so we're going to check this out. Check out master. Check it out. Okay, so we've got some local changes. I'm going to commit. What have we changed? Well, we got some debug messaging. We got rid of some more debug messages. And some more. And we fixed the test. We're going to get rid of all those. We're going to say reduce debug output. That's done. Now we've got a clean git history. Going to push this. And we're going to put this branch to bed. Which is, you know, somewhat tragic, but it's just life. We're going to check out the master branch. It warned us that it couldn't remove Laminar, moved to master, branches up to date. So it's basically telling us it's trying to update submodules. The Laminar submodule's no longer in the repository because we went back in time to before when we added it. Whatever, doesn't matter too much. I was fixing up the player input, which is why I was interested in doing this. Over here, what did I do? I added a Laminar submodule and fixed some lights. I would like to fix the lights in this branch too. I might worry about that later. Okay, so we're back in Cobalt. That was a fun excursion to Lamina. Let's not think too much about that. So we're now back in a different networking library, the one that's unfortunately 3 years old, but works the way that I like, and I'm going to deliver that for now. And if I decide I go back to Lamina, it's waiting good. Oh well. That was fun. Okay, so that's the server running, and whoops, I ran the server twice. Here's the game running, and a second time. Did I run it twice yet? Nope. Two games, and we're going to build a desk, and we're going to build some floor, and everything's drifting. Oh, that's something I forgot. Yes, so because the sync is now working, you're seeing the ship's drifting again, as you should. Ah, it's nice to be back in a land where everything works. Okay, so we're going to stick with this for now. I'll just make sure that Wireshark is quit. Quit by Wireshark. We don't need you. Quit without saving. So the challenge stuff that I wrote, I don't need to do because I no longer need to worry about it because Cobalt takes care of that. I don't need to change the test because Git took care of that and put it back the way it was. That list of actions that I showed you earlier, not actions, server messages, is back to how it was before. So the challenge response and acceptor back to being commented out. So we've got the next problem to solve. So the next problem to solve is my project structure, and this is something that was bothering me. This is the reason why I actually considered the change to Laminar in the first place. But having done some more thinking on this, I think it doesn't actually help really with this particular problem. The main thing it was going to help with was some theoretical future state where Laminar provides more features that I like. But that's obviously not going to work for me right now, so we won't worry about that. Okay, run server. This is run in a thread. So if you think about how my architecture works, run server is called from, where do we call it? I think I called it from Singleton. Run server, run server, run server, run server, run. Here we are. No, that's a test. Where do I run server from? Oh, that's right. I don't worry about that one. It's run client that I call from the client. You would not guess that from the name. Client. Here we go. That's what I was looking for. So I've got this function called start client, and it's really not that surprising. The way this works is you call this function, and it sets something called an atomic variable, which is for communicating between threads, and it sets that to true, and then it's like a static boolean, and it sets it to true, so we want the client to run, and then we create a new thread, and in that thread we call the function called run client. So this function down here is called, and it's in its own thread, and it starts running, and at this point here it's processing ticks in a loop, round and round and round. Now because of the way Cobalt works, it's taking care of that sleep stuff that I was doing manually in the other one. I'm sorry, I was just getting distracted by something else. So I was thinking about some planning. So in terms of some planning, we don't really want the network system to sleep. So this is what we're talking about changing. So if you look at the way this works, is it calls client process incoming and it passes it a mutable sector. So what's going on here is that we've got an infinite loop, and in this infinite loop we do ticks as long as client live stays true. So as soon as the other thread says client please die, it will stop looping here and it will quit, and then the thread will quit and everything will be nice and tidy. Inside this loop and inside these curly braces, we open a variable called sector, and we get something called get singleton sector. Now if you look at this, at the singleton sector, so remember sector is my globals, so the entire simulation for my game is in this object called sector, which is like an area of space. So the plan is that either we put one area of space in each process, which is like a version of a program running, or we have a list of them later on when the universe gets bigger. We'll figure out which of the two to use. Path of Exile uses a method where they run for a while and then they fork and share memory, so that might be something we can do. Anyway, we have this global sector here, which is a mutex containing a box, which is a pointer, to a sector. And down here in the client, every tick, sorry, it's not down here, it's back in this other file. So, where's the client file here? No, wrong one. It's in main? No. Where was I before? Lib. Okay. So put it over here. And then for this one, we'll change this one back to singleton. Okay, so the singleton has a global sector, and in the client what we do is every tick we lock the entire sector, we take all the incoming packets and process them against the sector, then we tell the sector to update, and then we create a list of all the packets we want to send to the server, because this is a client. But on the client, on the server, we call a similar routine here, send outgoing. It goes through every possible client and takes care of all of their messages at once. We could probably do something more intelligent. Now, do tick actually does multiple ticks. It figures out internally how far we have to go to catch up with the server. But that's a whole other thing. So one tick here may be multiple if the client or server is running behind its time. In the case of the server, it always does one. In the case of the client, it does multiple. And there's a whole bunch of nuance there I haven't bothered to explore. Now, I'm wondering if we want to take this loop here, the idea of this loop here, and somehow move it into the Godot thread. So the sector is owned by Godot somehow, and we tell it to poll the network. And then we tell it to, and we do this on a fixed time step, like a physics time step. And then we do another one where we ask it to update the sector. And part of that's probably about passing a list of events back and forward somehow. So if you ever look into process incoming and send outgoing, what they're doing right now is they are receiving off UDP and they're communicating and they're handling messages as well. And if somehow I could pass this to another thread, this is why I wanted Laminar, is because Laminar wasn't using a UDP like an object, but it already had built in this concept of receivers and transmitters, and that was going to make this refactoring simpler. So the main reason why I did the Laminar approach is because I thought it'd be easier to move all this logic into the same thread as Godot's using. So one problem I have here is to considering what Weird Constructor has a problem with his code where he wants to have a singleton or something similar holding a state. I need to have an object that essentially holds the world and that manages the connection to the server, and that Godot knows about this object, and when the object dies the connection goes away, and that you can go to a menu and you could choose what server to connect to or something similar, although the user will never actually get that choice. So that's kind of redundant. Yeah, so that's what I'm kind of thinking through at the moment, and I'm wondering how to manage it from the Rust side. Yeah. Weird stat. It sounds like Weird Constructor's going to ask. Yeah. Well, I used initialize once. That's what lazy static does for you. So I got build test starships, and that's from it's initialized by a once. So whenever somebody tries to get the sector down here, so there's init once. So whenever someone tries to get the sector, we call this function, and almost every single time does nothing, but the very first time it creates the sector. Yeah, so this does it using atomics and static data. So every time you ask to get it, you might create it, but only the first time you'll create it. That's how I do it. Anyway, and it's worked quite well for me in a couple of projects now. How are we going to do this? I'm just kind of planning in my head, and planning in my head and then saying it out loud is a bit interesting for me, because normally I just stand here in silence making faces. Let's see, what is this plan I'm doing in my head? I'm making faces. I'm imagining the concept of some object. It's holding a connection. I'd like to have these event buffers containing the data going back and forth. I like the idea of the network thread going faster than the tick rate of. But why? Why don't I need the network thread to go faster than the frame rate? What's the benefit? You get a lower ping, but it doesn't actually really reduce latency. The only real reason would be if you want to do retries instead of faster than the frame rate. But I think 60 frames a second is probably fast enough for this. And that's the other question is if I'm running a tick rate at 60 frames a second from Godot, can Godot handle that? In fact, I think Godot can handle multiple physics tick rates. So maybe we just need a quick bit of research first thing up. If I want to do a 60 frames tick rate, do I want to do it based on actual frames? No, they have to be in sync with the server, so I can't do that. So part of my idea of reason why I want to do this is I want to make sure that when the frame is rendering, it's disjointed from the world is changing. So you can take the one world and hold it in one place, and you can say, okay, now it's being updated, by the network. Okay, now it's static and it's being rendered by the rendering code, and we know the network code is not going to try and access it during that time. Okay, now it's being updated by the network, and at 60 frames a second rendering, they'll be like taking turns. But if the rendering drops down to 30 frames a second, we're still updating 60. So we go, network draw, network draw. And if the person's drawing at 120 frames a second, they're going to have to interpolate between those two states on either side. So you essentially need to render slightly in the past and then less in the past across those 2 frames. So how that works, or you interpolate into the future, which is probably what we'll do. So with that said, we need to know about Godot's fixed time steps. So, I just realized I was showing you all my history. Fortunately, nothing there is embarrassing. Thank goodness, I think. Yes, yay. Godot, fixed time step. We got this one, and then we can have a look at the Godot docs. Yeah, it's all just blah blahs. Let's see. They're searching for the word fixed. Where would one find physics has a fixed time step, so I wonder if I'll mention it in here. Collision shapes, physics. Node physics process. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a regular event which is going to happen at a different time from the frame in the same frame as the rendering. Why do I want that? Or we could do it every render, we could do it real fast at that point, or after every render. That would be less reliable. I remember seeing that there was an option in the initialization for Godot that in the project settings, which allowed you to it's loading at the moment. Which allowed you to set what the fixed time step was. Okay, so I've done something here to break ship. That's not very good. Anyway, did I open the wrong project? Yes, I opened the wrong project. when you open a project and it has big textures in it, it takes a little while to process those, which is a little bit annoying, especially if you've modified the textures since. Those really important assets. While it's done that, the Godot editor is locked up, so you just need to wait patiently while it processes these very large textures that make all my pretty rocks look pretty. Okay, so we're going to have a quick look in the project settings. I think somewhere in here we've got a fixed time state option, and I want to see how fast it is because I'm considering making that run at 60 frames a second. For our input, limits, memory, rendering, quality, threads, limits, no, VRAM environment, audio, physics, common. Yeah, physics FPS. That's the one I was looking for, and it's already set to 60. I bet that means that all physics callbacks run at 60 frames a second. Okay. Well, I can just trust that to be 60 because the only person changing those properties is me. Okay, so we'll just find out. Let's find out how to. Let's go to the Go.Rust documentation. It's on Rust rs.rs, or it's docs.rs, isn't it? And it's called GD Native. That's the one. And I've got the latest one, and I'm looking for I think it's Node, GD Native Node. Hopefully it has the names of all the things I can override. Physics process, beautiful. And I don't think it's going to tell me much about it. That's kind of annoying, but based on what we understand, physics process should be something that happens 60 times a second. So if I've got something that happens 60 times a second, and I'm going to do my network code from there, we can create a pretty simple test to make sure that that works the way we expect in a very basic sense. So we've got to think to ourselves as a client that, okay, so that's the first thing. So we're going to have a physics process. It's going to happen 60 frames a second. It's going to need to poll the network, update the world, which is what the body of the loop here is doing. Process incoming, do text, send outgoing. That's our plan there, those things. Now, it doesn't help that send. I think that chooses where it's send auto tick bool. See, so if this is inside the Cobalt source code. So if auto tick is set to true, it's going to do the sleeping thing. We don't want auto tick set to true. No, we want auto tick set to false. That way, it'll assume that Godot will call it at a reliable rate. Now, if I set this to false here, this is going to run too fast. But what we can do is we can have a look at our changes. So we've got this branch that we just created. What we're going to do is jump over to Star Factory Alt, Space Factory Alt, and I'm going to pull, and then I'm going to go up to the head. I'm going to grab this one. This alternate version is going to check out the laminar version. So we'll check out that branch, and I'm going to see what tasty pieces I can steal from it. There's some files in here. Okay, I need to reset this file. It's been changed. Let's try that again. Loading. Has some more tea. This, my friends, is licorice tea. I'll just pour it on my desk to prove how licorice it is. Non-caffeine, because it's the night time. Don't worry, I drank like 3 or 4 coffees today, so I'm good. Let's see. Okay, so this space, so now it's updating the submodules, which are the other libraries we have. Oh, can't show that one. This Space Factory, where are we? C drive, game dev, Space Factory alt. Here we go. So we'll set this as the left folder for compare. We're going to compare it to the, well, actually we'll go into here and we'll look at the RS folder because that's the only one we're interested in. So we're going to set that as the left folder, and we're going to go back to here and set Star Factory as the right folder. This is Whoops, I did the whole thing. I didn't mean to do the whole thing. I meant to do a subfolder. There we go. Get rid of those other files. I don't need those. Okay, and then, wow, there's a lot of extra stuff in here that I don't want. It's like I looked at the git repository. Oh, I know it's wrong. It's all got it in view mode where it ignores the folder structure. I don't want that. View, always show folders. Good. I'm only looking at the RS folders. Set a space folder. Now, what was it I wanted to do? Now that I've done that, I can now look at all view. Oh, well. I wanted to go into lib and I wanted to check out the changes I made. What in particular? I wanted to remind myself what was going on inside sgnet lib. So lib sgnet source lib. So we can see what I added in here. You can see that I added this concept of having a lib, this loop here. So using tick forever rather than using the thread. Looks like I forgot to put a stop in there so that it would stop. Oh yes, there we are. There's the stop. Great. So that's what I want to change this to. So here we are. We're changing from using. So we're running the loop as fast as it will go. Now what we're doing is we're doing that sleep thing again that I commented out earlier. Remember how I commented out the comment for sleep? And I'll just put that back in. Tick forever. Is that still there? I hope so. And then when I set this to false down here, the client will the client library will not block, but we will here. And then later on, I'm going to replace this top one, this blocking, by a Godot thing. Okay, so run the server. Stop and rerun. It was already running. Okay, and run the game. It probably was running too, right? I don't think it was. So the game is just waiting. So the game will wait until the server's compiled, and then off we go. That's just a Rust feature for you. Yeah, weird constructor. You needed some Godot resources to initialize your static data. And so you needed to use a root node to help initialize it. My comment on that is be careful how much static data knows about Godot. My static data doesn't even know Godot exists, which is like just the way I like it. Okay, this didn't compile, and the reason why it didn't compile is someone was holding the client. The most likely thing holding the client was the Godot engine. When the Godot engine is open, it grabs my DLL and it holds tightly onto it, and then you can't link it anymore. So I need to quit that for this to work. It's quite annoying. That only started happening, after a certain point. I need to go back and track down why that's going on. But lazy, busy, you call what you like. The point I wanted you to see was that the client is still working, and the client's still working is all I really care about. Oh, I still got that sleep message because I'm going back in time, but that's nice to see. So that's working exactly the way I expect. Okay, so that's the first thing. So run the client. Next thing is we need to make sure that the client is an object that we can easily manage. I wonder if I should make a struct for that. We've got a client file. What's in the client file? Well, it has a struct in it, I think. Yes, implement client, our state, tick counter, all that sort of bizzo. So in lib, what's client doing? We make a new client. We bind to the socket. Down here we get the sector. This part I don't really want to have here. Why am I setting the That's weird how I say that we're the master of the sector there. That's not usually what you do on the client. Normally only the server considers that you're the master of the sector. So that's suspicious. I probably should fix that at some point. That's something to do with who's allowed to, who we duplicate to and from. Maybe I just never finished that properly. What else do we do? This stuff. What do I do with UDP? Okay, so I connect it here. So I wonder if I need to put that inside the client, or do I make it a tuple, or yeah, because you end up with a client wrapper, don't you? Next thing you know. or a connected client, or a tickable client, or a client with manual tick, client thread. What are we going to call this thing? Don't like client wrapper, but it just is the best description I can think of. Don't really want to call it connection. Naming things and caching, and those are the two biggest problems. Two biggest programming problems: naming things, caching, and off by one errors. Two biggest problems. Anyway, what do I name this? I guess this is gonna be client wrap. I can't come up with a better name right now. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's write the client wrap. So we're going to create a new file. New. It's going to be a file. When you create a new file, we need to go into lib. We need to tell it there's a new file. So we need to add mod and the name of the new file. Okay, and we've got pub use create new file is going to be client wrap. It's going to have a structure called client wrap in it. Nice one, Tom. Anyway, touch typing will come back to me eventually. Let's see. So that's what the class is going to be called. Okay. So link file struct client wrap. I'm just going to grab this file here that we're just working with, put it over here on the right hand side. The client wrap has two members in it. Those two members are going to be this UDP connection here, which is, as you can see, of type server. I'm surprised it doesn't tell me the whole. There's probably a refactoring specify type explicitly. Very nice. Ugh, that's really verbal. Wonder if there's like a define for that. Oh well, I'm not going to think about it too much. I really can't be bothered. Okay, specify type explicitly. So those are the two types that we're going to be. I don't want config actually. We want the client, client, which is down here somewhere. Where do we build client? I seem to remember this being a client somewhere, but I think what was going on there is I'm looking at the server one. Nice one, Tom. Client. Here we are. Pardon me. And then there's a new client there, which is of type client. Great, okay. So there are two members of client wrap. The first one is UDP, and it has all these words in it. To client, first argument, UDP socket, then binary rate limiter, no op packet modifier. So those must be all the good things that clients can do for us. And that's the thing that sends the messages to and from the server. And then we've got another client, which is of type client. So client. Now, C-line being what it is, I can just push Alt Enter a bunch of times and it will figure itself out. That's a cobalt type. This type is not a cobalt type. That type is my internal type. How do I tell these two apart? Client and client. I must have... I see. I was using the word cobalt client. In fact, cobalt client probably has all those... Yes. Okay. I don't need to write all those words that are written in here. I just need to write the word cobalt client, and then everything else takes care of itself. So I'll just write cobalt client. This client is from the crate. So that one. Okay. So that is a client wrap. And then we need to make a bunch of stuff. So the first thing we'd like to probably have is a new function. So the new function is really boring. New. Okay. So the new function, okay, so it takes the address and it also takes the, I was going to get rid of this type, it's red. Takes the address and the config. So the config is the type config. So new config. Well, we don't need to pass a config in because I'm going to use the default one. I'm not going to let the user choose a config. I'm just going to call, so we just want the server address, do we? How do I do this? Further down, I think we specify who we're talking to. Who you're talking to, man? I think that the client actually knows in a hard-coded fashion when we create it. somewhere down here, I think we bound to server. That was one of the things that we had, that we fixed when we changed to laminar, was we allowed a client to actually specify the address it talked to. Connection, process incoming. Maybe we didn't. Connect to address, run client address. Config default. Where do we specify the server address? Or did I just say run client and tell it the server address too? Yes, that's what I did. Okay, so that's good. So that means that Cobalt doesn't make us specify the client's source address, which would have been annoying. I'd rather not know that. I'd rather that was managed for me by the library, and in this case it does that, so that's perfect. Okay, so all we need to do is pass address in. Address is still a string, so we're going to pass this string into this new function, and that is the server we're going to connect to. Any other arguments worth mentioning? I don't think anything else was worth it. I think it was a pretty lightweight thing. So we want a UDP, we want to connect, we want to bind, we want to create a client, and in the darkness bind them. UDP client. Nice thing about Rust is that if you specify in a structured definition, so we're creating a new structure called client wrap here, which we're returning. In a structured definition, if the variables happen to match the name of the members inside the struct, it automatically realizes you're probably trying to assign them. So there's no reason to say UDP colon is a UDP. It goes, you don't need to do that because it's got the same name. You only need to do this whole UDP colon thing if they've got different names. So that's this is creating the class instance client wrap, which we're passing back by a value here. It's a move. That might sound ugly if you used to C++, and that sounds like a copy, but it's not. In Rust, it will not copy it really. The function, it'll basically be created in the scope of the calling function automatically. And then everything inlined and all sorts of lovely magic happens, and let's just pretend that there's no performance cost, because generally there isn't any performance cost. Okay, I'm not sure why that's complaining. Why are we not happy? I forgot to write client wrap here. Okay, and this needs to be a public function. Okay, so that's how you create a client wrap. And the next thing to do is to call tick on it. So if you think about what tick is all this stuff here. We have to get the sector, process incoming, do tick, send outgoing. I'm just trying to process in my own mind whether I want to separate those steps. My immediate reaction is no, I want to keep those steps together. But I don't want to get the singleton sector. I would like to get in the singleton sector to occur outside of this. I want to pass the sector in. So pub function do tick. And we're going to put a sector in a second. So this function takes the sector, and the sector is a mutable reference to a sector, and so this function takes a sector, modifies it, and doesn't return anything else apart from having changed the sector in the process. So if we're doing this, if we're doing the process over here, we just call we're going to call it client here, even though it's a client wrap. So client wrap do tick, and it's going to call a mute sector. This is a very straightforward, like we're basically lifting routines straight out of this other code here. So we're going to create, we don't need no information. Is that information? We don't need no education. Boom, boom, boom. We don't need no thought control. Okay, so we're going to create a client. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. We're creating it with the address. Okay. So we're creating a client. Do we need? Does do tick does require mutable? It does require access to itself. So we're going to put a mute. So it's mute self, right? And then we need self.client. We also need to put it in front of these things. UDP. We don't need to already got a mutable reference for the sector there, and here, and here. This is complaining because client is not mutable, so we need to make it mutable here. Sector. Yeah. My guitar playing is not good enough to make it with. I mean, it's not exactly tuned. It's not exactly good, but you know, good enough. Anyway, that's enough. I'm not sure how well that came across on the microphone, but anyway, it's not even tuned. Probably a bit late for that, actually. Hopefully no one's complaining. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I needed something analog that was off the computer. So, I it's all okay. It's my own fault. I wanted to show off. There's this really great website called justinguitar.com. This website's amazing. Go buy yourself a guitar. Costs $100. Learn some lessons. Totally free. Lots of fun. Yeah, I know, right? At least there's no parties outside. Yeah. Anyway, got an electric guitar too. This is why I've got this device on my desk for picking up microphones and so on. It's actually, unfortunately, really humming a lot. But I've got this device for plugging guitars in and stuff. There was a big plan about, like, you know, recording, trying to make some music. But I've decided that of the two, making a game is more important to me personally than, and I'm better at it probably, than making music. It's possible that I'll make some bad music at some point. Yeah. Congratulations on your marriage, by the way. You should get back into guitar. Oh, that's unfortunate. I've always feel a bit sad for people who have instruments and just don't, like, I mean, I'm not doing as much of my music as I'd like. I've got my son into drums and my daughter into violin, so at some point we'll be some sort of progressive rock band, but it's not to be just yet. I mean, one thing that blows my mind is that the kids will be moving out about the same time as this game is finished. So, yeah, it's a long project. We were refactoring client wrap. Let's see. Client wrap new address. Okay, so it doesn't know what that is. We need to import that. What did I just do? Oh yes, I did want to make it public. That's good. But I don't want to be public crate. I want to be really, really public, very public, so public. So we make a client. Here we're making a sector. That part don't really want. Now I want to play more guitar. You guys are just evil. Anyway, down here. So much fun. That's a client ticking. We also need this send. That send is part of the tick. So I'm going to put that here. Now, one thing that was really important before, when this was true, is you will notice the code. It had this send occurred outside of this curly bracket. That was critical. And the reason why that was important, if you haven't already figured it out between me telling you it's critical and now, is because this sector is actually a mutex. And as long as we hold it as a variable, it's blocking us. It's not allowing us to access the sector from anywhere else. And so because it was a mutex, I needed to make sure that we were sleeping outside of the period of time we had the mutex locked. Which is what I did by having this curly brace at the end. So that's just something to bear in mind if you're trying to do this approach, otherwise it will never work. I'm glad you're still doing music with Constructor, because that's the most important thing. One thing that's helped me with the guitar is memorizing some chords and really working on the changes as fast as you can. And the other thing is realizing, for my own curiosity, realizing how the scales work. Maybe we should do some sort of, I don't know, Skype jamming session type thing. I don't know. We'll figure it out. I I need to start editing some videos that show this stuff off at some point as well and get more active that way. Anyway, what am I doing here? Oh yes, this refactoring. So this should compile now. Let's just see if it does. Okay, so what have I missed? Okay, so there's no Cobalt client on the root. Okay, so I want to let I think it's in a submodule. I'm going to let this figure it out for me. Okay, so it's in something called connection Cobalt. Oh, Cobalt client was my own class. Oh, okay then, that's fair enough. Let's try now. That was my own type. Info, client is connecting. Okay, so that's a log thing. Why is it? Oh, it's because I haven't imported it. So it hasn't noticed because it's not a macro. It's this one here, it's for logging. Interesting how it didn't come up as red. This here needs to be self.udb. That is too. I probably need to pass a reference to it. That looks better. Now it's just complaining that I've got mutable references where they're not actually necessary. So the client doesn't last. So this client here, I might just get rid of this variable and say client is a new client, like that. So that's working. Well, that's compiling. Let's just see it works. So we're going to run the client one more time. It would be incredibly surprising if it doesn't actually work. I mean, I missed a step basically, and I didn't do anything. Yep, that's basically working. I might just get rid of that log entry for sleeping, but apart from that, that refactoring, that simple refactoring is done. So the main thing to do next, I'll just fix the sleep first, and then I will, well, strictly speaking, the sleep is temporary anyway, so there's kind of no point fixing that because we're going to be using Godot instead of that. So that's probably a distraction too. Okay, so my favorite approach to help me dive into the blue yonder of like changing a bunch of stuff is to make sure that my Git is clean. So if I make sure this is stuff created by Godot when I imported those textures, and this is what we just changed. We created a new file called client wrap. We modified lib so that we took that code out that we extracted, and we also added up here the new client wrap. We added the new class, and that means it's being exported from the module at the top level. I like doing this. That means I can move classes between files later without breaking all the code that depends on this. We started using tick forever. So those are the main changes that we made this commit. So we extracted the idea of a client so we can tick it for manual ticking. So the plan now is we're going to move the client updates to a fixed time step controlled by Godot. And then we're going to start polling the inputs and passing them as actions every frame. And then we're going to make sure that those actions make it over the network to the server, and then we can start using the actions on both the server and client in sync. Once they're in sync on the server, we have to do something like prediction. This is when I start going through this process in my head starts to explode. So we're going to go through the steps to get the input to the server, and then we're going to switch off from Godot, and I will switch to writing unit tests to make sure I understand it. But the basic idea is that the server has to predict things. All sorts of crazy stuff has to go on. Unfortunately, not very graphical, but if we got it all working, then we get some pretty amazing real-time good stuff. Good stuff. Very good stuff. Must keep moving. Just keep moving, Tom. Always moving. Okay. So the one file we really want now is called client wrap. That's going to be on this side. We're going to close others. So only client wrap is open there. We're going to go into SG core, which is where I'm talking to Godot, and in SG core I want the one which is called star world link, which is the one that is at the very top level of my structure, and I don't want anything other than this. So we're going to close others. So we're going to make sure that star world link knows how to make a client wrap. Now, to know how to make a client wrap, I guess you probably just need to coach them through like fast vocalism and a bit of music skills, but in this case we probably could use an example. This is where we initialize our existing client and make him wrap. So a star world link creates. So most of my things here are inside options. So there's no reason why we shouldn't just do the same thing with client. So put client inside an option. And this is our client wrap, where he like pimps his skills on a microphone or something. He starts off as none. Down here in ready, that's when we get told. So I've got a function here called start client. So that at the moment spawns a thread for the client, but we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it here in this class. We'll call it start client again. It's going to take a mutable reference to self, and inside of this function we're going to create a client wrap. So instead of start client, we're going to use self.startClient. We're going to make sure that I remove up here this call to the existing start client, and in fact to kill clients as well. So exit tree has kill clients. So we're going to say self.killClients, or add another function for that. We'll just say kill client. There's no reason to have clients because there's only one. Mute self. Let me sit a bit closer. They give you a bit more volume, a bit more time. Gotta just pretend to be cocky or something. Okay. What to do to start a client? Well, we call the client wrap code. So if we have a look in lib, we can see that I call this new stuff with an address. The old start client code that I used to import is there, and it just used this server constant, which is from SG Simulation Network Server. So this is where we're going to get our address for the server. Later on we might do something smarter. Later on we're going to have to ask some sort of world server to resolve a DNS to an Anycast server, find a realm server of some kind, and then ask it who to connect to. But that's all for later on. So let address equal server, there we are, initialize with the address client. I think new opens the client connection, so that's actually done. Next thing to do is our own client representation is now a sum, and the sum is this client. If we had an old client and we do that, that was going to dispose of it there. I'm not sure what happens if you just delete a client. It probably will close everything nicely. That's kind of how Rust tends to do it. Let's just assume that's what it does and just set it to none there. Yeah. Let's have a quick look at Cobalt server. Cobalt server, Cobalt client. This is a class for Cobalt. Is there something here for disconnect? Connect, receive, send, reset, disconnect. Okay, so there's something here called disconnect. So we're just going to if we have a client, so if some client equals self.client, we're going to use a reference to client rather than move it. We need a mutable one. Mute. And then it needs to be mute here as well. Mute. Then client dot tell the client to disconnect, and then set self.client is none, like so. I need to let here. So that's how we disconnect if we had a client. This part makes a new one. So we can safely just call kill client here. We'll start by always killing it first, and that will do nothing the first time because we won't have a client to work with, and if any other time it'll make sure we cleanly kill the old one the first time. So that's our connection. So if I was to just run it now, we should see that it connects, but it doesn't send anything because we're no longer creating a client. But what we can do now is we can add a fixed time step function. So we're going to export a function. So that it's called physics process. So here's an example one that was from some example project for a spinning cube. So that one was a mesh. That one's a mesh instance, but we're actually a spatial. That tells us how long it's been since it was last called. Okay, so when this is called, it's called at 60 frames a second at 60 FPS as called at 60 FPS is configured in the Godot project settings somewhere under physics. So that's how it's configured. We're going to call self.client.tick or something similar. Do tick? What did I call that? Oh, yes, client is an option. It's possible that client doesn't exist. I'm going to use the if approach to this problem. So that was one we used from the disconnect. So in here we used got some, so we'll just do that up here. So we've now, if the client exists, we've got an instance of the client. Do tick. Yeah. I mean, I could try and connect if we don't have one, but I'm just going to assume that it's connected. If we wanted to, we could put a statement here to handle the else case and connect it, but I don't really want to. When we tick, we need a copy of the sector. This is interesting now. This is starting to get interesting. We can move the sector so that it is owned by Star World Link, and that is the exact reason why I've gone to all this trouble. I want to move away from a singleton one. I want to move to one that's owned by this. So what prompted that was that when the physics, I realized I haven't passed a sector into my network code because it's waiting for one to be passed. So I got ship scene, star events, events, client. Now weighing heavily on my mind is the fact that as soon as I if I move the sector into Star World Link, I need a way to find that from other objects. Like, I need to be able to find the Star World link from inside of the ship link. This guy. How are we going to do this? One possibility is that when the ship link is created, it somehow registers itself with the Star World link, and then that registration allows us to call back and forth. I never really figured out how to do that. I did have a global map. We had a singleton global map somewhere. It's only called a certain way. We can guarantee that it's multi-thread safe. You know, I'm not a big fan at all. So in case you're not following, my concern is I want the Star World link to contain the sector. But Star World link is not the only class known to Godot that has to interact with the sector. Ship link also has to interact with the sector. And ship link I don't really have a very concrete way of accessing the instance of Star World link from the instance of ship link. I don't have a way of asking Godot for a pointer to it, or of I could do it by going to nodes and casting, but I'm not sure if that would actually give me a Rust pointer to it. So I can call functions in it through Godot, but I can't call them each other through Rust, which means I need some backdoor, which is what the static data is for. One thing I know for certain now is that any singleton I do create is only going to be used access from the one thread, which makes mutexes very cheap. So the network's not going to block waiting for the frames to render, because they're going to happen at different times because of the fixed time step change. So right this moment, I'm not going to worry about this issue. We're going to leave the ownership of the sector. We're going to leave that as a singleton for now. But we know that we're no longer accessing that from multiple threads. We're always accessing it from the same thread. And we're using our mutex to do it. I have no further comments on that. It should never have any lock contention because it's always from one thread. Yeah. At some point, I will come up with a better idea. And when I do, I'll let you know. But for now, in the physics process, we're going to do the same thing we did in the client. We're going to just lock the global one here with get singleton sector still. Not that I really like it very much. We're going to pass it in here, get singleton sector. Ugh. Do tick, pass it the mutable sector. Is it? Yeah. Can I pass it like that? Yep. Cool. Okay. So I'm just going to do a quick A/B test. So we're going to run the server. In fact, the server's already running. I've got a bug where if the server runs too long, and then I start a new client, it takes a long time for the client to catch up with the server, because when a client connects, it doesn't go, oh, what tick are you up to? Okay, that's great. I'll start at a similar tick. It actually starts at tick 0 every time, and then it runs forward in time until it reaches the same time as the server, which it works for now, but it takes a long time. And like a lot of problems, I haven't bothered to fix it yet. Okay, this didn't compile because client.disconnect is not found in client, and the reason why is because this is not actually this is a client wrapper, so it's going to have to add a disconnect function. So let me add a disconnect function to the client wrapper that passes that information on. So quickly write in pub. Yeah, I want to put I've got two Rust classes that are both created by Godot because they are script classes, and I want one of them to get appointed to the other one somehow. Another way of doing something very similar is having both of them have pointers to some other data. I could do this with arc pointers. So I could make it to the Star World link, creates an arc pointer to some shared data, and then the ship link creates itself, and it looks somewhere static for a map, finds the Star World link, finds a copy of the arc pointer to the shared data, and now they both have a pointer to the shared data, and inside that shared data could be a sector. But it doesn't really solve the problem, because instead of moving the shared sector from, we moved the shared sector from static to some other class. I'm not sure how we'd handle mutability in that sense, because arc pointers still require a box or something for mutability, which in this case would be a mutex, which would be the same as putting a static mutex. The only advantage is I can have multiple sectors in memory at once, not just the one singleton, which is a huge advantage really, but only theoretical at the moment. Yeah. So yeah, that's my ramblings on it. Back to happy times. Okay, we're making a mutable self.disconnect. So this is just a way of forwarding the call to the. Oops, that's not going to work out well. We want self.client.disconnect. It just warned me in the debugger that that's a loop, and it would express, that was basically recursion would express better as a loop because it was tail recursion. Because I called itself. Okay, it can't figure out how to call. Oh, it's UDP that I want to disconnect, not client. It's compiling on the other screen. Okay, so our server's now running. Now, what I've done here, you see this line, is I've actually told the client never to update. It's never going to do any ticks. It's never going to do anything. It's not going to talk, I don't think. It's not even going to connect to the server. Hold on a second. Okay. Just itching some goodies. Love from beyond the office. I'm just reading a comment here. My Godot classes, I really only have Godot stuff to do. If I have to set or call things across those, I just use properties and export methods. To link Godot objects to static game state entities, I just use IDs, indexes, or integer pointers into a list, basically. Yeah, and that list I imagine is static and behind a mutex, right? Or a list that's a Godot list. Yeah, no? Let me know. Weird constructor. That list is a Rust vec. Okay, and where does it live? Does it live, is it static or is it inside one of the classes? in my static global object. Exactly. So it's how we manage a static global object that I was wondering about. I was wondering if it was possible to get rid of that static global object. My current thought is it probably isn't possible to get rid of it. At least it's not practical. Yeah. So you hide it, you wrap it inside a nice state object that makes your life nicer. I mean, most things are built on static data somewhere. Like you think about a Godot's essentially got a static scene tree. I don't know where that is, but it looks static to me from how it acts. Cannot move out of immutable reference. So we're trying to move this. This is on Star World Link, line 66. Star World Link, line 66. It says I'm trying to move this. Just reading this again. There's a lot of warnings. I probably should go through and fix some of these. Unused variable client. Unused variable sector. Okay, let's just rattle. I'm just going to rattle through these and fix them. I don't really know a way of leaving them conveniently in your view, without being a pain for me as well. So we've got. I've got another window that popped on top of that dialogue. Let's get those out of the way. I'm just reading this again. What I take is that it's not practical to separate the two like this. Think of it like a micro network link between front end and back end. So do you mean it's not practical to have two different classes written in Rust talking to Godot? Are you saying that we should have just one class written in Rust talking to Godot? And that one class has a lot of logic to manage the entire scene tree so there's no communication problems. That idea has legs. There's kind of no reason for Godot to know about a ship link. It's just a concept that I came up with because I wanted to make it seem more modular. I like the idea of having lots of bits of logic. But you're right, I have gone down a rabbit hole. I've kind of got myself stuck in a way of thinking, and I appreciate an outside point of view on that one. So my interpretation of what you said is that rather than making a different class here that's instantiated by Godot, what we should do is we should instantiate, essentially, this is no longer a Godot class. This ship link that manages a ship is a regular Rust class, and then there's a list of those classes here in Star World Link, and when we use them, we find the relevant node and we pass them in to use them, and then we forget about the Godot world. So that rather than having it so that there are multiple classes bridging the divide, we only have one class bridging the divide, Star World Link, and the other classes are utility classes that work with Godot but only temporarily and are called by Star World Link. And that's really interesting because the Rust guys have made so much effort to allow us to have scripts on multiple nodes, and we're just going, nah. We want the absolute minimum integration. We want just enough to call across the boundary. We want to define our own script language. One disadvantage, I might still end up making a class that is ship link and that just forwards the calls back to Star World Link somehow to make other scripts make easier to write, make more sense. Because ship link at the moment has some functions in it. Process, update, add, export. This build module, you tell the ship you want to build a module. Edit floor, you want to edit the floor. Yeah. But this other stuff that is doing all this game specific things inside the ship to update it, that's essentially part of what the Star World Link is doing. That's great actually. That's a good refactoring. I'm going to do that. So what that will allow us to do is it will the idea of updating the contents of the ship will be something that the Star World Link does, and it does it based on the sector. Then the Star World Link needs to be on anything with the sector. I'm reading what Weird Constructor has said. Yeah. My main problem is how do we manage game state? Because my game state's gonna be essentially one big blob. Anyway, I was going to rattle through and fix a bunch of compilation issues, and I've got into a design discussion with weird constructors, so I'm concerned that was a really useful, though. I appreciate you bringing that up. I just want to not sit too long and chat here. This is something we should probably do in Discord as well, and just figure this out, plan out what the next steps are. Okay, SGNet source lib. Thank you for mentioning it. I really appreciate it. Lib, we're going to go through and fix these warnings. So line 10 is spotted that we don't need Cobalt client. I wonder if I should use something like format that might do some of the stuff for me. Client rat 39 has a warning that there's UDP disconnect. That's a different file. Self.udp disconnect. What is a warning? I need to just say, okay, I don't care if it was connected before, I'll just disconnect it anyway. This function here returns an error if it was already disconnected. I really don't care. Star World Link 66. Its problem is that consider prefixing. Okay, so it's just saying we don't even use the client. So the reason why we don't use the client is because before I was just doing this testing. I don't care if it has a warning. Unused variable sector, also don't care. Unused variable owner, due to Star World Link in the physics process. Yes, we don't use owner. You are correct. And we also don't use delta. Also correct. And we don't use something called pause, which is where Star World Link 210 pause. We don't use this pause here, which I had there, I think, for debugging, or surely I write that out. I think I decided to get the position from somewhere else. Variable doesn't need to be mutable. GD Star World Link 64. Yeah, let's just compile this again. No, I want to run this again. Still not happy. So the reason we're not happy is because we can't move out of a mutable reference, and the reason why we can't do that, let's have a look. I don't see why that's a move. Self client. Oh, I see. We need to get a mutable. We need to do a mutable unwrap of some kind. It's like a get mute. As mute. See? Which is a mutable reference. You do as mute like this, and then we get rid of this mute ampersand here, and then that will work. I'm probably going to have the same problem with killing it down here. So we'll just run the game again. One more time. So just trying to prove that nothing is taking the client in the background thread. That actually, here we are, we're not really talking to anybody. So we've initialized, but the server doesn't know we exist because we haven't talked to them. But if I go in here and I start calling this tick in the fixed physics, now I expect everything will come to life. And if it doesn't, then of course I've stuffed it up. Let's see. What a pretty picture of my own face over here. It's nice to see that it's still working. Oh, this is not so good. That's not what I hoped to see. So, physics process, maybe that's not getting called. Maybe it's not connected. Maybe we haven't written it in as client. Okay, so if that was ticking, we should see. We can see that there are ticks occurring because this is updating. Oh, I think I know what's wrong. I think it's something really boring. I think the ships are just flowing far away. No. Okay. But whatever's going on, the client and server agree on what tick it is. So that's really positive. Why would that work? Why would they agree on what tick it was? And yet we can't see anything in here. Ah, I know one reason why. One reason why is kind of embarrassing, but actually the code that creates the initial ships, not the code that populates the ships with stuff, but the code that says there are ships, I haven't written the network sync for that. So unless I specifically on the client create those ships, it doesn't know that they exist. And again, this is, you know, work in progress type stuff. I should probably write a list. Those are apparently really good. I should write a list of all the things I haven't written in the network code. But one thing I haven't written yet is the message that's going to tell the client that there is a new ship you can see. Here is its details. Because of that, the client doesn't know that it can't make any sense of these messages to do with updating that world because it doesn't even have it in its mind. But it does, so it understands that there is a world that has, like it knows about the ships, but it doesn't know where they are in space. That's the part that's not being synced. If that makes sense. Okay, so in the old, if you were paying attention, like I didn't actually describe this out loud, so you could easily have missed it. In the live function on run server, here is where I created the sector for the first time. When I created the client, I also created the sector. I got the singleton sector. I built a static sector, which is it contains the ships. And then for some reason I set master to true. I'm not sure why I did that. I'm sure there was a good reason. Anyway, I need to put this code, and I need to go and put it in my client connection. And in theory, this could be called multiple times and initialize the sector multiple times, but yeah, it probably won't. Okay, great. So you see how happy I am to let things be ugly until I've like nailed stuff down, and I'm going to make it more beautiful later. I think that's important, to not get too caught up on making things perfect, because as long as the right tests are in place, it's easy enough for us to go back and forward in time. And wow, that ship is really moving. Look at it go. That was cool. You saw it go flying past as like we caught up with time. I'm not sure where the little one is though. There should be a little one somewhere, but there's certainly a big one here, and it's moving through space. And it's moving through space because in the Rust physics I had the initialization which moved it. So in case you missed that part, the part where I stopped it moving, that was part of the Git repository. So that's beautiful. By the way, this gap here is actually expected behavior. There's a wall tile I haven't rendered yet, which describes has internal floor on both sides, and it's specifically rendered as a different image in this little world here. There's a little U shape, and I think it's that one. Anyway, because it doesn't exist, we can't render it. Yeah, all the machines are sucked into space. Totally. Don't worry. It's just because the hole in the floor is too narrow. So if I delete some floors so that it's now 2 tiles wide, you get these funky corners. That's really glamorous. Again, another problem. 2 walls back to back. That's also a special tile. I'm using a different kind for that. Once you make it big enough, it looks beautiful. So, you know, usually when that happens, I very quickly draw some more deletions. There's just, it's a work in progress, okay? Right, I try not to get too overwhelmed by all the different things that need to be done. It's okay. It really is. It's like there's a conversation I was having earlier where we're talking about how games have holes in them until they don't, and then suddenly everything falls into place and it's fun to play. And I mean, I'm already having fun just building, just being able to put a scoop in and then build some conveyors. It's actually pretty fun just to do this, right? And have a refinery and have some more conveyors and see all the ingots come out. I think that's pretty cool myself. And then we can hover over it and you can see, that it's a refinery. It doesn't tell us what its contents are yet. This physics moving has to update the cursor's position. It's not doing that yet. You see, there's little things I need to worry about. I'm trying to worry about one thing at a time. Anyway, I'm getting distracted again. Thank you, that's a really good point. These are all minor things. The most important is gameplay. And the most important thing to gameplay is allowing this little guy who I can move using my cursor keys, I need to synchronize him to the network. When I've done that, he needs to have a flight disk. He needs to be able to go, oh yes, it's a flight disk. Oh, I'm going to push E. When I push E, it needs to zoom out. We look at our view, and then like the ship turns, and then we can fly it. So this is my dream, and then we can go eat some asteroids. Nom nom nom. And I mean, whatever the hell's going on over here needs to be fixed. But I mean, I'll figure it out. Okay. This is gonna be so cool. This game's gonna be so cool. So that's no longer in a thread. So if you've missed this, we're now updating the network from a physics thread, as opposed to updating it from some sort of client thread, which means the sector is always belonging to the D. Godot is always in the Godot world. Where Construct is asking if I paper tested this game, I have decided that my game is too much like Clockwork, and my concerns are not about I'm not concerned I can make the game fun. So we constructed a conversation with me on Discord recently where he said he was concerned about making a fun game, and I said if you're worried about making a fun game that has all the right rules and that works, make it work on paper. My concerns are not that I can make a fun game. I am not concerned about that right now. I am highly convinced that I can make a factory game in space. It's fun. I don't know exactly how yet. The things that are bothering me are technical problems. I need to make a multiplayer game. I need to be able to make a Clockwork lockstep world and also an action game at the same time, and actually make it work. I believe if I cloned Factorio, that it would be fun, because Factorio is fun. So in terms of game design, I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to straight up clone it. I'm going to do something different, but I'm going to make it close enough that it's fun, that like it feels fun in the same way. Yeah, that's what I have to say on that subject. As soon as I get concerned, part of the thing is that I'd probably find simulating the conveyor flows monotonous myself, and I love coding. To be honest, I'm doing this for the fun of it. Like, I'm having a good time right now, trawling through all these bugs. We have moved our communications to the Godot Thread. This is pretty cool. We have gone here, taken the starword link, added the physics process, started client, kill the client, fix that warning, added a disconnect, put a Cobalt server in. What have we done? Network is now maintained from the Godot Thread. So what's cool about managing it from the Godot Thread? Well, what's cool about that is that now it's pretty trivial to say, okay, we've got a copy of the sector. The network is not touching it. It's now safe to poll the input stuff. So if I was to look at Git, I would find that I have a branch. Where are we? By the way, I'm sorry, it's white. You'll notice most of my stuff is black. I don't like white stuff. You can probably tell by looking at my face that white stuff is kind of annoying in a dark room. So, let's not worry too much about that, but I apologize for blinding you if that's what I'm doing. Now, I have here a player input branch. All the things I care about I've committed. So, I don't know why it says, I'm wondering if I want to commit these import files. They're probably in the wrong place. That's probably why they're there. I'm going to remove those. I don't need that. I'll remove the laminar file. Let's have a look at what's happened in Cobalt. Commits submodule changes. It's got a workspace file. Okay, so we'll just add a workspace file. Do I care? Not really. It's going to recreate it constantly, though. Or ignore it. I'm going to git ignore this one. How are we going to git ignore that? So unstage that. And add file to git ignore. Ignore. And stage the git ignore file. Ignore workspace changes. So I'm just trying to get a nice clean commit window that doesn't have anything bugging me saying that it's not committed. So in the Cobalt RS project, we just updated it. So in order to make changes to the parent, we now have to push the child. So if I go into Cobalt, this is not the Cobalt that I originally cloned. I cloned and forked someone else's repository. So this is my copy of Cobalt that I'm maintaining, because the original Cobalt hasn't had a commit for 3 years, which is why I changed to Laminar. But, you know, as it turns out, I still like the way they did Cobalt better than the way they're doing Laminar, because I understand it and it's simple, and I got it working, and I really don't have the mental bandwidth to worry about it. I don't know why I started opening that can of worms, honestly. It was a mistake. Star Factory. Okay. So, with why is there no other changes? Okay. I'm going to put this change into the previous change. So we're going to amend commit. And this stage to commit here. So what's... Yes, network is now maintained from the Godot Thread. Commit. Okay. So the new version of the Go.rs comes from... the new version of the Go.rs comes from there. Okay. I'm going to push this because that feels nice. That felt nice. Okay, so here is a commit that I started working on, and like all my whip commits, I have commits that don't compile. And I think the reason why I've got this commit is because when I streamed for the first time, I wanted to start from a working base. So I took everything I was working on at the time, and I put it into a whip commit. I have lost my chat window. Let me just find that again. Can I find that again? We'll see. Oh yes. There we go. Well, I put that in a whip commit back then. So that'll be the 13th. Oh, lucky 13th. Okay. I want to bring this up to date. So I'm going to check out the player input branch, like so. Probably shouldn't have bothered checking out with submodules, but that's okay. I'm going to move this branch all the way up to the top here. That's called rebasing. So here we go, rebase current branch on selected commit. Yes. So what that does is you can imagine it as having deleted all my old commits and recreated them in the new place. It doesn't actually delete the old ones, but we forget about them. So if we look down here, the server still remembers our old commit. But locally, when we talk about that branch, we got this commit up here. That one is based on master, and it won't compile because it's a whip commit. That's why I called it whip. So if I try and compile this now, what we've done is I've created a new action. So if I go into actions.rs, I created one here called player input. I think I also created interacts with. Player input contains all the things I could possibly imagine wanting to know about what the player is doing with their input keys. We want to know which client is making inputs. We want to know what their button states are. I created masks for all the buttons I could think of on a normal controller. Which ones have changed, which is basically using the same buttons as the same mask. We want to know where the left stick is in terms of proportions in the two axes that a stick could go, both left and right. So this is something that would be controller based, this idea of input, and I might then map keyboard keys to the same controller buttons. I'm not sure how to manage this very well. Another way to do masks would be to like name all the different things that are going to happen in the game. What I'm imagining I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a controller that's blank. I'm going to figure out on my game logic what I want to map the different buttons to. Then I'm going to go through and refactor it to rename the constants to what the buttons actually do rather than what the buttons are. So I'll change from calling them left, right, left, right, up, down, primary, back, special, 1, special 2. They'll be renamed to whatever those buttons actually do. Fire, charge shields, launch torpedo, tube 3. And then I'll have some sort of bindings. But for now, I'm just going to use the controller buttons because I don't know what things I'm going to do. I'm going to figure that out later. And I'm hoping to do that experimentation not in Godot, but inside of... Anyway, we'll figure that out. Choices are really overwhelming. So when possible, I try and choose the ones that are just... Whatever I come with first, we'll do that. We can change it later. So that's why I'm using these boring non-binded versions. So we've got a player input. Now, in my system for actions, the way these all work, so let's just quickly show you how that works. So if we go into simulation, and we go into source, and we go into this module called actions, I've got one here called place module. So if I want to place a module in the game, I want to say where it is in X and Y, which module it is, and which direction it's facing, left, right, up or down. Right? And so I make this like so. Which module it is could be from this list. Storage, conveyor, refinery, scoop, manufacturer, constructor, flight console, engine, generator, weapon, mining, laser, weapon, railgun, and wall. There's a few placeholders in there that should be pretty exciting when they're in the game. Now, place module is implementing a trait. I created a trait for my own convenience, and this trait is called executes action. Executes action has one function. I give you one function, and that function takes a mutable world and it returns something called a module, an undo action. I'm not sure if I want to keep these undo actions. It was kind of an idea, but it's getting quite hard to actually do these, and it might not really work. The idea of an undo action is you can run time backwards by undoing everything that's happened since a certain point. I don't think, in many cases, the idea is they're supposed to save enough information to reverse whatever they did. It melts my brain a bit at the moment, so I'm not sure if that's actually going to work. So placing something calls this function here called build and add module and expects that it worked, right? And so later on it's going to be possible to not be able to build something because you build on top of something. But if you look right now, if you try and build, if I demo the game, I'll show you how you can build two structures on top of each other and they can overlap. So, that's a rule I'm going to put in later. Up here, this long function, build and add module, actually does the doing. So it creates a new module based on this large case statement. If you go to conveyor, this is specs code, by the way. Gets the specs world, creates an entity, and then creates inside of it the different components that we need. Conveyor needs conformation, conveyor module, production module. This one here is a flag to other code that links conveyors together into a virtual idea of a conveyor. Down here we've got a module needs formation, which could be linked into the conveyor network. Storage module, grid, production module. Grid is like a chest, basically. There's a concept of storing items in a grid. Down here we've got refinery module, has a recipe storage, which is something designed for refineries. And again, a production module. Production module, everything that can be rendered on the screen on a grid inside a ship is a production module. But that by itself doesn't actually, it has the concept of place and how it looks, but it doesn't actually have any logic to it. It's these other classes are causing the logic. Manufacturer, constructor, scoop, flight console, engine. You've got all these different types. Most of these are placeholders right now. I've just put them in for now. They don't even have models yet. So that's how a module is placed. So in player input, what do we do each frame when we execute a player input? Right now, we have apply. We're going to check to see who are you. Like, the action tells us which entity in the game is inhabited by the player. Maybe they're inhabiting a console which controls a ship, so they're inhabiting the ship. We need to check that that's valid. And then if it is valid, we need to take their inputs and we need to interpret them in light of them being in the ship. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that this whole concept is built around the idea that both the client and the server are going to both execute the same action at the same time on the same entities which were in the same state at the start, using logic that is executed the same on both computers. So actually both computers will stay in sync. So if we make sure they both do that, all those things, the world will stay in sync. But it's not going to stay perfectly in sync. It's going to be slightly out of sync. I'm building this idea that the server's going to run them both, and then it's going to go through and check to see what things went out of sync, and it's going to fix those things. It's going to do a bunch of hashes and determine. So it's half lockstep. Should be interesting. And the concept is, the idea is I want a sector that's so complicated you can't possibly synchronize it. You're only partially synchronizing things, but it still works, and the players can't see it most of the time. And if they lag out, they might end up walking to a part of the ship where things are missing and you can't see them. And it's just part of an artifact of the loading mechanism. But that you can have massive worlds that are unbelievably huge. I'm just going to respond to a really kind comment which was written in a Discord server. there's an individual who hurt his foot after going to a convention here in Auckland for Path of Exile, and I thought it was really important to make sure he got safely home, so I made sure that happened. Okay, that's written. Good. Sorry about that distraction. Now, let me get back to it. I was talking about physics, I was talking about actions, I was talking about player action. Yes. So on the server and client, later on, we're going to be able to write some code that goes inside player input here that will interpret an action, and it will do things like move a ship or add thrust to a ship. And we're going to make sure that the physics stays in sync between client and server. And that means that by adding some extra button logic to this function or functions it calls, we'll be able to move ships in the simulation. And I'll be able to test that that logic works the way I want by writing unit tests that don't even know about Godot. Because this whole action thing doesn't need to know about Godot. These actions are created by Godot, but they not necessarily the only way you could create them. You could create them in a unit test by themselves. So, yeah. Okay, that stuff's a bit complicated. Don't let my brain unmelt. Okay. Back to the task at hand. Task at hand is to get inputs and put them into Godot. Now that you guys know what the hell that is, let's get into that. Physics process. Okay. So we need to do something to collect input. So let's just be explicit about it and call the function collect input. Now there are multiple ways we could worry about this problem. We could send an input command every single frame. We could send an input command if it changes. I'm going to go for the input command every single frame for now, which is like overkill. Some network libraries build their whole networking infrastructure around this idea that the client will always send an input, and then because the client always sends an input, they kind of have a frame by frame tick. You only allow one of them, that sort of thing. I'm not going to worry about that right this second, and I'm going to try not to get my head stuck in this performance space. I always try and optimize performance when it doesn't really matter, and get too fussy about the fact that that's actually a lot of data. We can fix it later. Collect input. Okay, we need to make one of these new guys. So we're going to make a player input instance. These things are all public. Player ID, button, state, button change, left stick, right stick. So the basic version of this would be to first we go let mute input equal one of these. So that's a basic version of it. There's a new function. I made a new function for this, so we'll use new. Nice. So when you've got a new player input, I'm sorry, I'm being distracted by this. I need to close Discord now. Client ID. So the first thing is we've got a player ID. I don't even know. Does Godot even know what our player ID is? Our sector should know. Our client should know. If our client knows our own client ID, then that would be one way of doing it. Does that client get told what our client ID is? I can't remember. I'm going to just ignore the client ID problem for now because it's not really important until we do validation. So we're not going to worry about player ID. We're going to set that to 0. Okay. Oh, I set it to 1 in the other one, so set it to, I don't know, Okay, the next thing is button state. So all these buttons that we need to populate, how would we populate all of those? So we've got Godot. Let's have a look at how Godot does inputs. God, that's bright. And that actually also bears in mind that we might need to, I wonder how we're going to sample inputs across frames, because it might be that a button is pressed so if a button is pressed so momentarily we don't see it at a 60 Hertz update rate, then was the button ever really pressed? Like, do we just want to debounce that anyway, which is another way of saying, do we want to ignore it because it didn't happen for long enough? And I think, again, whatever is easiest is what we're going to do. Okay, inputs. That's the way of getting the exact input state now. Input examples. I really want an API at this point. Okay, so we've got is action pressed. So if I'm going to use the is action pressed, okay, so we've got, if we're going to use the is action pressed idea, I'm going to go through and add them all. Or we've got input events. What do we have here? So we've got joypad buttons, input event keys. So these are any input keys, I imagine. Bool, stand codes, scan codes. Okay, so there's a global scope which has the actual buttons. Okay. Are we going to say that here be dragons? Should we just not worry about that problem? Okay. I'm already starting to get second thoughts about this idea of using physical buttons. Left, right, up, down, primary, back, special 1, special 2. Let's just... We do want left, right, up and down. We want primary and back, special 1, special 2, trigger 1, trigger 2, cycle left, cycle right. Those are all things that are pretty amenable to actually putting as bindings. Okay, so let's not worry about that. So we want to know if the down is pressed. I think that means it's down at the moment. Is released. Is action pressed. Okay, so we're going to use is action pressed. So what we're going to do is go through every single one of these masks, and if the relevant action is pressed, we're going to set a boolean. So we've got a bunch of Godot strings, we've got a bunch of masks. We're going to OR those, if the relevant function for input calls, we're going to OR it into a larger mask. I'm starting to see the idea of a loop that goes through an array, and I'm wondering if I should just define a list that has string constants in it. So the way that would look. So here we have this list here of constants. We can just create an array here, and it defines all the different names we're going to put into Godot shortly. And I wonder if there's probably a very elegant macro we can write, but in the list of things that I don't want to learn right now, it's the macro definition language. I know that it would make this task easier, and I just can't be bothered. So I'm going to create a const, and this const is an array. I'm going to use a slice for this, because the slice I don't have to keep adjusting. So we're going to have key bindings. I know it could be up to 32 long. Its type is going to be a pointer, and the pointer to an array, and inside that array are tuples, and each tuple contains a string, and it contains a mask, which is a button mask. Right? And populating our array are many of these tuples. So that is our key bindings definition, and it can work for, yep, that works. I probably need to put a curly brace here to say 1. I don't need any tuples, so that's an empty version of it. Yes, good. Okay, so with that definition working, we just need to rattle through all of these names, put the strings in, make them lowercase. Okay, let's do this in Notepad++ because it has really great tools for this. Okay, so here's what we're just looking at. So using Alt and dragging creates this line of cursors like this, right? So I'm going to Alt select this out. I'm going to Alt select everything here out. I'm going to Alt select down here. So we go Alt, and then for each of those cursors, Control to the right. Delete. No, it didn't work. Okay. I'm going to how am I going to do this? Control backspace. Okay, they got most of the way there. Do the rest by hand. Okay, and then we're going to grab all these, copy, paste, Alt select down here. We're going to get rid of this empty line. Okay, I want to make all these ones lowercase. So edit. Plugins, I think. I'm not sure if I have a lowercase conversion here. That's a pity. I guess the constants and Godot will be uppercase then. Yeah. Okay, so I want a quote character. So go down here. For every one of these I need a comma, then open quotes, then I need, at the other end, I need a close quotes. And then I just need to get rid of all these spaces in here. So replace space with no space. Replace all. Whoops. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I want to do it in selection, which is somewhere in here. In selection. It doesn't see this as selected anymore. Okay, it doesn't support that kind of selection. Oh well. Now I regret not writing this in Python code. I could have written a little Python. Well, it's not too late. So that's our list is equal to a string. So the list is equal to that. And we're going to split this on white space. And then we're going to, so L is currently a list like this. And then what we wanted for every line. So we want an output. So we're going to print an output that contains first, we want a format string. First the data we want is X. Then we want a comma, which is correct, open quotes, then we want to have lower X like this, and then a closing quote, and we need to put this whole lot in brackets, and then we need to do that for X in, and it's in L. I forgot to put there's a closing quote missing here. Isaac. Interesting, I'm missing something here. My curly, oh, I see, I put a quote here. I didn't mean to put a quote there. That makes more sense. Okay. For X and L. Oh, closing bracket. Okay. What did I miss? I stuffed that up. For F, this. I got that closing quote for X and L closing bracket, closing round bracket, like this. And is it too lower? Too low. I'm getting so distracted by something stupid, aren't I? Okay, so it was a string function. So I need to say x dot lower. So yeah, just a bit distracted trying to... There we go. And then we want to join this, a bit distracted trying to make some Python go in the middle of my Rust code. To run in Godot. Always fun. Turns out that print returns none. List has no attribute join. Oh, that's right, we use a string join. So comma. So we want comma and a new line. Dot join this. Creates a string. We want to print this. Great. This. Oh, and if I put quotes in here. I thought I had put quotes in here. Oh, that's right, I need to backslash them. That's what was wrong before. Oh, there's a way around that problem, but I'm not going to bother right now. This that you see on your screen here is missing a closing quote. Is missing, got the bracket in the wrong place. That you see on your screen here is me trying to create a table to put in Rust to compile. And I mean, strictly speaking, I could have written some sort of Rust macro to do this for me at runtime, which would have been really cool. And it would probably turn out to be really important to do. But to be lazy, I did more work probably needed to do. Anyway, hopefully it pays off in the end. This is when I realized I needed to put the word button mask. I don't, because these are all constants. I've got them around backwards. I'm supposed to put the string first, then the mask. Well, the easy way to change that is to just do this. I could have changed my Python code, but if that's the way, if I assumed the mask should come first and then the string, then I probably should just change the way I define this table to match my original assumptions, because that way I won't come back later and make the same assumption and the same mistake a second time. Key bindings. There's no keys required for triggers. Oh, sorry. No, that was perfectly fine. Nothing to worry about there. Okay, key bindings. So we're going to rattle through all those keys. We're going to turn the right-hand side into Godot strings. We're going to ask Godot to tell us if the button is up or down. So we need a function that can build a mask. Function build button mask. Build button mask is going to take nothing and it's going to return a button mask. Like so. Okay. Shouldn't do that in front of the microphone. Okay, so we're going to let mute. Probably could use some sort of really fancy accumulation type trick here. I'm not going to go all functional. I'm going to use my standard way of doing accumulators, but I know there's a really cool functional way of doing this. I'm not going to bother. I should make that like my quote. Tom Lee's. I'm not going to bother. Button masks. That's my name, by the way. If you just join me. I don't know how many people are watching right now. Probably 2, which is fine, actually. 0. Let's see. For mask. For mask and binding string in, and we need to say in key bindings. So key bindings is a constant. I really should have made it uppercase. So it's really key binding strings. Key binding strings. For all of those guys, I feel like feel like I've got stuck in Python saying in. For a moment here, I'm getting a bit nervous that I've made a mistake about the syntax for Rust. I always have this problem when I switch languages, I get concerned. No, I'm just being paranoid. Okay, that's good. So for each one of those, I need to ask Godot's input manager. Please tell me. If the button is currently down. Let's see. What does that number mean? Total views. I don't see any people live on the channel here. I don't know what the hell that was going on there. Anyway, I was expecting to see a little number pop up here saying how many people are watching the stream now. I assume the number is 0 then. Okay. With GD native, I'm glad to see the number is greater than 0. That's nice. It gets lonely when the number is 0. Thank you for sticking around. I'm glad I'm not boring everyone to death. How's it going so far, DHX? Were you having a nice time? I'm just having a look to see if I can find the input manager because I want to ask it what buttons are pressed. So input's probably a singleton. Yes, Godot singleton. So to use a singleton, you have to, well, ask for the Godot singleton. So we're going to put the Godot singleton at the top here because I don't want to ask for it constantly. So let inputs. I'm just going to bring this up again. What I'll do is I'll put it over here. You can't see it, but just trust me, it's there. And then if I look down here, I can see that key pressed is not mutable. That's cool that you're using me as background to like set up PoE. I'm glad you decided to join me to keep you entertained while managing that sort of other task as well. Yeah, while Constructor was saying that watching streams was really awesome for like having as nice background noise. And I certainly enjoy watching stuff like Marble Machine as background noise as well, but I just would get sucked into those because they're so well edited. I'll try to be boring enough so you don't want to like watch me instead. Anyway, let's see. The input is going to equal the input class dot get Godot singleton. I'm not sure if yeah. So I call the function called Godot singleton inside of the input class, and that returns the Godot singleton. Once I've got that, I can now, for each binding string, which is I need to get the Godot version of that string, which is like a reference counted one. I wonder if there's some way to cache those because they're really just pointers to hashes, the hashes in the string. It's probably nice to be able to pre-compute those once and use them many times, but again, I'm not going to do it now. Godot string is equal to binding string. How do I get a Godot string? So there'll be another example in this file here somewhere. There's point to Godot string from string, and you pass it in the string. String. So that is how we make a Godot string. I don't want to read it because there's a word string in it too many times. It's a bit ridiculous. Okay, here we go. Let Godot string equal Godot string from string binding string. That wasn't so bad, was it? Input dot is key pressed? No, is action pressed? Is action pressed? We're going to ask Godot to please look up an action and tell us if the button is pressed. It's going to return a boolean. If that action doesn't exist, I'm not sure if it blows up or if it just returns false. I guess we're going to find out. And is action just released? I wonder if these functions are updated here in the static frame or only when you render, because we want them to be updated every 60 Hertz, even if we're not rendering. So when you push a button, even if your screen doesn't update with the new visuals, it's still sent over to the network anyway, which will reduce the input latency. Since we're not an FPS, this is probably detail that doesn't really matter. You can tell I get my head wrapped up in irrelevant detail. Okay. I'm going to pass in the Godot string. We're going to get back a boolean is pressed. And that is equal to whether the action is currently pressed. If the action is pressed, I literally typed that in. One of those rare times where the language matches exactly your intent. If is pressed, we want to take the existing buttons value, we want to mask in the mask, or in the mask. So that sets those buttons which are pressed into the buttons accumulator. Now, one important thing about my design is I need to know what the buttons were last frame so I can create this frame's action. The easiest way to remember that is going to be simply to store it as a member variable inside the class. I can't think of a very good reason why I wouldn't want to do that, so I will do that now. So now build button mask is going to need to have a mute self so I can access what the previous one was. Or I could do that computation outside of this function, which is more elegant. So I'm going to do the computation outside, which then means build button mask does not need to be in GT Star World link. This is actually a function that's generic across all Godot code. So I'm going to move it out of my Star World link. I'm going to put it inside one of my util functions. I've got some SG core helper. I'll put it in the helper root. They've got things like instancing scene, try loading scene, try load materials, try load meshes from. We'll put a function in here that sits at the top level that knows how to build a button mask. We need to make sure the key binding strings, which is what I was working on before, that list I made in Python. I need to make sure that you can access those from outside. So it's usually a public const. Key binding strings. And that's inside player input. That's probably enough to get it. Unless I haven't made that action public. I probably haven't. So I need to go into actions and have a look at where I am using. So I've got the player input module as not public. And so down here I have the player input module and I input, I do a public use, player input. We also want the other class, which is key binding strings. And with those two classes, with those two things, I should never import it from the other place. There we go. Import. So build button mask will return like a value that contains a flag set for every one of these binding strings that's true. So So I want to set the player state to equal this other value, which is build button mask. Now, which buttons have changed? So whenever we build a button mask, we can calculate what's changed by comparing it with the previous one. And that's a simple function called XOR, which compares two bits, and if the two bits are not equal to each other, then they use XOR. So if one's 1 and the other one's 0, that's true. And if one's 0 and the other one's 1, that's true. But if they're both 1 or both 0, that's 0. So if it goes from 0 to 1, the XOR does a good thing. It looks for changing bits, rather than AND, which looks for two bits the same. You know, they both have to be 1. Or, which looks for either of them can be not 0. That was like the worst explanation. You need a logic table to understand this stuff. Anyway, button state. I'm going to, because the Star World link is the guy who's constantly sending the button state, I'm going to let him be the guy who remembers what the last button mask was that we had. And what's important about this button mask is it's how much it's changed since the last time we sent something to the server. We don't really care if it turned on and off between frames or samples. We care about these events. So I could ask Godot to tell me what's changed, but its idea of what's changed is different from the kind of change I care about for my simulation. So I'm going to do it myself, and then I'll get what I want. So last button mask is the button mask, and that button mask defaults to being off, all buttons off, which is 0. Okay, and then each frame we're going to sample all the buttons. So we're going to say input button state is equal to build button. Well, I could just be explicit about this. So let current mask equal build button state. Button state is equal to the current mask. Input dot changed. Is there a changed? I don't know why this isn't showing me a it hasn't found the player input struct. Hasn't found the player input struct for some reason. I don't know why. I'm going to figure that out now, because if I figure that out now, it's going to give me some nice suggestions. Use SG simulation. Did that make it work? No. Okay. So we want button change. Button change is equal to the current mask. And here's the XOR, which is the little hat symbol. The previous one. Last button mask. So any bits that changed since the last time we did this are going to be true in the second one. So if a button gets pressed for the first time, state will be true, change will be true. If it's being held down, state will be true, change will be false. If it's been released, state will be false, change will be true. And if it's been released for a while, state will be true, state will be false, and change will be false. So these are all the possibilities. It's getting a bit late. I'm getting pretty tired. Might stop on 20. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I'll probably just stop around midnight anyway. It gets too hard. Anyway, let's keep going. Self last button mask equals current mask. So next time we call this function, we're going to remember what we just did there. So we have not yet read the left and right stick. So as you know, I'm consulting the documentation on this other screen here. You can kind of half see it in the bottom of your screen, what I'm doing over here, so you got some idea that I'm doing good things. I'm just looking to see what joy axes there are. So there's get joy axis, getting them by name. Get joy axis string. Get joy axis from string. which is kind of what we're looking for. Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out if I want to do joysticks yet. You know what? Let's solve the synchronization problem for just buttons for now. We can move things around with the cursor keys, and then once that's up and running, I can worry about joysticks. That works. Let's go with that. Okay. Collect input. So collect input is going to return our new player input object. So at the bottom here, I just write the word input, and that will return it because that's how Rust works. Yay. So whatever's the last statement in a function is what's returned if you don't put a colon on it. There's probably some technical name for it I'm getting wrong here. That's okay. I'm getting tired, everyone will understand. Start client, kill client, set world ID, process. I'm just trying to refine physics process, do tick. Okay, so we want to calculate our inputs before we do our tick, because we want to send them to the other network clients. We want to do our tick based on the input. We want to keep our latency as low as possible. What's often done in these situations is that the client is running behind the server, and so the client instantaneously does the input, and it hopes to get it to the server in time for it to receive it before the server reaches the same point the client is already predicting to. And so what that means is that the moment we detect the action, we should do it immediately on the client, and on the server it should be running behind, and it should all just work. Now that's the reverse of what we're currently doing. In my game at the moment, the server's actually leading the clients, or they're exactly in sync. So one thing we have to do is move the server so that it's behind the clients by ping. Yeah. So many changes to worry about. It's all going to be worth it in the end. Physics process. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get our input. So to get our input, we call the function we just made. So it's equal to self.collect input. Now collect input needs a mutable self. Only because it's tracking this thing called last button mask, which implies there is maybe, I don't know, it's really no point keep moving this further and further out of collect input. I'm not going to bother, there's not enough going on here. But that's just something worth tracking. It also means you could actually start having the idea of a token, like you could put a class inside of this that track that one variable and have that one method on it. Again, over abstracting. Yeah, I'm getting tired. I'm just babbling now. Sorry. Okay. We want to submit the action. Sector. Sector has a way of submitting actions. How did we do that before? If we want to find out how an action is created and sent into the network code, easiest thing to do is find out how it's done for something else. So if I went into the ship link and I went and had a look at one of these functions here, I'm scrolling down to add module, build module, determines what we're going to build, and then it creates the place module action that I talked about earlier. Remember I told you how we made modules. So it calls place module, X and Y location module facing. This is how we make it. Once we've made it, we got on this variable called action. That's right, and we had this event queue called self.instructions. So that was a queue that would allow us to send messages from one thread to another, in this case from the UI thread all the way back to the network thread, back when that was a thing. And it was because of these event queues that I was thinking it would be easier not to do that. It would be easier to just have direct access to the sector. So I imagine if I was to look at instructions, I would find its type. Here is a world instruction queue. That implies that it's in the lock world or the sync world that I do this. That's the lock world. Let's look at the sync world. It's a bit crazy how this all works. And it's a bit crazy how many layers I had to make before it started making sense in my head. You have a sector contains a map which contains world syncs in that map, which each contain lock worlds, and the lock worlds contain actual specs worlds, each one managed by a class that understands how they are either production floors or sets of spaceships. That's a simple version. Submit action. This function here is a function that I think receives it from the network. Yeah, it's going to send it to the network, and it puts it in a list of all the actions we're going to send out. And so submit action, with those instructions I mentioned, I bet submit action is called from those. Sector process message. This looks like something network related. So submit action seems to be getting called from the network layer once it's been accepted. This looks really promising. Populate sender. If we're on the client, we populate the sender with the actions we're going to send. So the sender in this case is a queue of messages to send back to the server. And that queue of messages... so this is why things are a bit slow on my game at the moment, is all actions are sent to the server tells us when they're going to be executed in the future, they come back from the server. The moment in the future is always like about 200 milliseconds later, because that's to cover all latency possible. Later that was going to be adjustable. This is a very lockstep model of timing. And then that future point, then we see the world get changed. Again, we're going to solve that problem by predicting into the future and doing rollbacks and all those other nice things later on. So we're going to just, I guess we're going to just suck it up and call this input queue. Yeah, I'm getting seriously slow now. Collect. I was going to try and grind out this last thing, and then I'll let it go. And be one with the wind ends. No. Do we have instructions here? Sector world event queue. I think that's the one we're looking at. Let's just check the ship link. There's the world instruction queue is one we need to send instructions in. No, you can't come in here. I'm just going to say goodbye to my friends online, okay? Okay, well, my daughter has come out of her bedroom and she needs some attention. I'm going to go now, and I'm going to go and be of assistance. It was a pleasure to co with you guys tonight, and I hope you have a great night. Yeah, and when you next see me, we'll be getting these actions out into the world state and working. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Let me just find all my stream stuff and shut this down. Thank you very much. Good night.